my mind, there can be no better person than the next speaker to throw light and share his thoughts and visions on the unfolding story that is India. He was an integral part of the UPA, serving the citizens of India in various ministries, the last being as the Minister of External Affairs. He had his initial education in Delhi and St. Stephen's before reading for the Bachelor's of Law from St. Edmund Hall College at the University of Oxford. Some interesting facts about him. Almost 50% of the cases he takes as a lawyer are pro bono. And he also happens to own 60 cats, 50 dogs, and 200 birds. The insights he will provide on today's topic will, I am sure, be most interesting and incisive. So listen carefully. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Salman Khurshid to address this august gathering.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was expecting to speak second. First, I thought that Mr. Subramanian Swamy would speak, and that would have given me a good occasion to question the establishment. But as things stand, and it's consistent with our democracy, that the establishment speaks later, and therefore Dr. Swamy will speak later. He's a very dear friend, and it's good to have him as a friend. But I must tell you something. When President Kennedy visited Ireland for the first time, he introduced himself to an Irish audience by saying, "I'm the man who's accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Ireland." I therefore have to say, I'm the man who flew with Dr. Swamy to New York. And I say this because there was a techie sitting next to me on the plane who took a photograph and then said, "Do you mind if I go and take a photograph with Dr. Swamy?" And I said, "No, of course, you should do that. It's very important." So he went and took a selfie with Dr. Swamy, came back and said, "You know, it's funny, but I said to him that I asked him, 'Are you traveling with Mr. Khurshid to New York?' And he said, 'Certainly not. He's traveling with me.'" So here I am. I concede and I bow. I've traveled with him to New York, and I am very happy to be speaking before him. But I do hope that in the panel discussion that we have, that I have a chance to respond to anything that he says, and therefore the last word will not be his. Be that as it may, I would imagine that having him here representing the establishment, if at all he represents the establishment, is easy, because he's a fair-minded economist. He speaks the truth, which is something that one doesn't always encounter at home in our democracy. And therefore, I hope my job becomes easier. I'm here to say, and I will not contradict a widely held opinion, that India is a remarkable destination for investment, that India is on the move. India is the emerging economy of many people's dreams, and that India has a great future in terms of investments and in terms of economic growth. All of that is true. But I do want to add a caveat. This is not something that became true on the day I lost my election in 2014, and certainly not true since then alone. This is something that happened 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when India moved into the age of reform, when what we had done since independence, not as a mistake, but as a considered opinion, to establish a strong economic base for a country with unique problems and with enormous opportunity. And we opened up India's economy to possibilities and opportunities that people had never imagined existed. When we said that we would now deal with the market, but it wasn't that India was shifting completely from a closed economy or a state economy to a market economy. India was always a mixture, a mixed economy. And all we did, and I was lucky to be in that government as well, all we did was to do a little change in the mixture of the mixed economy. And we moved more rapidly into opening up the marketplace, into giving people opportunity to compete in the market. But we were very conscious that although giving people opportunity to compete in the market was the big answer for rapid growth that India would require, particularly since there was a huge generation and growing number of people in the new generations that would demand higher standards of living, that would demand jobs, that would demand opportunity. The dead generations that have been described as the aspirational generations in our country, aspirational generations that gave effectively the 2014 electorate result, the electoral result of 2014. And this is something that we anticipated, and we began to work to provide opportunity for these coming generations, but conscious of the fact that simply opening up the markets was not the answer. So the impressions that the world had about now was the time to go and invest in India, as indeed they had about China before us. China had at least a 10 to 15-year advantage over us, was not something that was a simple one-level effort that we could have endeavored to implement, because of the unique conditions of the Indian marketplace or the Indian polity. And the unique conditions were clear to us that there was an enormous segment of Indian society that didn't have the wherewithal to be able to stand and compete in the marketplace. And therefore, in a remarkable effort in the government to which I belong, 10 years of the UPA government, we built an enormous social safety net. I think that the world over, perhaps going well past some of the exciting schemes that Brazil had implemented 20 years ago, we gave to India a remarkable social safety net of providing people with safety in terms of food, in terms of housing, in terms of health, in terms of education. The right to education was an entitlement that we gave to people who couldn't have dreamt of going to good schools. The right to food that we couldn't implement because we went out of office was 75% of India's population would have got subsidized food, and not subsidized food against which any free market person can react, because all social democracies in the world, including a democracy like United States of America, has periodically intervened in terms of social justice by providing crucial subsidies in the area of food and of health. And I know that the health sector has been an enormously controversial and a very, very controverted area of implementation of outreach in terms of health assistance that can be provided to middle-class people in this country. The educational subsidies that they get in Europe, for instance, the food subsidies they get in Europe, for instance, still a matter of great debate. But nevertheless, on the level on which any country could have done this was done by India, in food, in health, in housing, in education. And along with this came enormous political interventions, political opportunities that were offered, which China never did. China offered economic opportunity, but never offered political opportunity of the kind that we did. And that came with the right to information, the widest right to information legislation that any country has ever provided, and widest, going far beyond the contours of right to information in Europe, in America, or anywhere else in the world. The critical problem in our country was, how do we integrate rural economy with the urban economy? How do we change the terms of trade? How do we shift the terms of trade from industry to agriculture? And that is what the big question today is. So even as I stand, and I stand to support what I hope Dr. Swamy would say on behalf of the government, on behalf of the establishment, that India offers great opportunities. We cannot forget and we cannot turn away from the reality that India still has a huge number of people who live below the poverty line, who live without the hope and aspiration of being able to become part of this new India, the India of Mr. Modi, the India of the present BJP government, that promises to be a dream for everyone who wants to invest, particularly those who have come away from India and have made fortunes for themselves in the other parts of the world, those who have provided great succor and great support and great opportunity to people elsewhere in the world, and how they can come back and bring India into the same loop as indeed they have participated in the rest of the world. How do we do it? With the fact that you've just heard in the previous segment, you've just heard people who don't have financial inclusion. They're still people. People have the mobile phone, but they do not have the capacity to pay a doctor. People have a mobile phone, but they do not have the capacity to put their children into school. People have a mobile phone, but they don't have the capacity to travel even 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers. How do they do it? The smallest of Indian businessmen, the person who sells fruit in the marketplace on a little cart, how does that person who doesn't have a refrigerator, who doesn't have a car or doesn't have a two-wheeler that he can travel on to get to a place from where he can buy the fruit that he has to then sell in the market, a fruit that has a 2-day shelf life and after which would be totally wasted? What does he do with that? How does he manage to ensure that his buying and selling is so balanced that he has some money to take home every day? So what we did is that we, in a hurry, not being able to provide enough job opportunity, particularly in rural areas, then we gave to the country a remarkable new scheme, which was called named after Mahatma Gandhi, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Job Guarantee Scheme, which gave 100 days of job, 100 days of work to anyone who came and registered, and 100 days of work at a particular wage that would be higher than the minimum wage in that particular state. And that's been a hugely successful program. It's been successful enough in places like Punjab for people, big farmers, not being able to get labor, because labor is now getting more than they used to get in the past. They're getting more out of this scheme. But this is something that doesn't solve our problem. The same people that today have 100 days of wages are the people who must get a more productive job in the next 5 years. And are we being able to give more productive jobs is a big question. We were hoping that we would turn our rural parts of our country into hubs so that people didn't have to move from rural parts to urban parts, that the congestion in our cities are getting choked. How do we keep people away from cities? They will remain away from cities if they have education, if they have jobs, if they have health. If they have health and other facilities available to them, not if they don't have them in rural areas. They will inevitably travel to the urban areas, and they travel to urban areas. We get into a huge problem and a huge cycle of crime. We get a huge cycle of disruption of human relations. We get into a situation that could develop into food riots, could develop into any kind of riots, etc., that we have had an experience of having seen in 2002 and 1984. And that becomes a very, very important challenge for our country. The problem today is that we have been given a lot of promises, but we haven't been able to deliver. And I will be fair. I will be fair to this government. This is not an election meeting, and therefore I needn't be be one-sided. Any government that comes into power in our country will have a problem. But the government will have to be careful. Promise only as much as you can do, because frustrated promises and frustrated people can be very destructive of a democracy. We have a problem. We in our country today disagree on many social issues. We disagree on religion. We disagree on opportunities in terms of communities. Reservation and reverse discrimination is once again a big issue in our country. We disagree on how police reforms have to be done in the country. We disagree on language in the country. We disagree on the clothes we wear. We disagree on the food we eat. We disagree in the place of worship. We disagree about the manner of worship. We disagree about intermarriage by intercaste marriages and interfaith marriages. And all these problems come to the Supreme Court. And every decision of the Supreme Court then is challenged in the streets of the country. We are in a crisis. Our country is in a crisis, and it is not good enough to say that our country is in crisis because of the government of the day, because that will be extremely unfair. Any government that was in power today would have to deal with the crisis, and there is an answer. The answer is have faith in democracy. And in democracy, you have to understand that dialogue and conversations in a democracy are very critical. You cannot have a democracy only on numbers. Democracy has to be on communication. The trouble with India today is that we've forgotten that communication is an integral part of democracy, and we have restricted ourselves to numbers. Numbers can lead to dictatorship. Numbers can lead to a defeat of democracy, ironically. Democracy is about numbers, and yet numbers defeat democracy. So a democracy is something well beyond numbers. And that's the critical thing for those who are friends of India, for those who want to come to India. We invite you all. We will do the utmost to be hospitable, to provide you with opportunity, because it's not something that is a favor to you. We need you. We need to integrate into the world. We are integrating into the world economy. We are therefore susceptible to what happens in the world. And therefore, to have a say in what's happening in the world, we first need to plug into world movements. For that, we'll have to give if we want to take. And I think that's the fundamental thing Indian policymakers need to understand. The fundamental thing that Indians need to understand is that we must have more discourse, we must have more discussion, and if we can't do it in Parliament, let's do it in places like these. I do hope, I come as an optimist, I do believe that we will get back to a discourse and a dialogue. We'll get back to democracy as it should be, participatory democracy, more wholesome democracy, more fulfilling democracy. And when that happens, I hope that this gathering will be remembered as a very important step towards that direction. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Is that 20 minutes? I think we...
Thank you, Mr. Khurshid. Our next speaker is Dr. Swamy. He needs no introduction, so I'm not going to take up much of your time. Dr. Swamy is an Indian economist, mathematician, lawyer, and politician who serves as a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha. He's a 6-time former parliamentarian and a former Minister of Law, Justice, and Commerce. In 1994, Dr. Swamy was the chairman of the Commission on Labour Standards and International Trade with a cabinet rank. He's responsible for formulating and implementing trade procedures and an export strategy that became a gold standard in the time to come. Dr. Swamy obtained his undergraduate degree in maths at Hindu College, Delhi, and then went on to get his Ph.D. in economics at Harvard University on a full scholarship. He was also a member of faculty at Harvard University for 10 years. Dr. Swamy, we welcome you on stage.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. In this 20 minutes, I I will devote my attention to the economic developments since 26th May 2014 and speak about the trends that have taken place, why, how it affects business, and how it can be rectified. First of all, I'd like to say that the BJP came to power after 33 years in full majority. And it was not based only on economic performance that we promised, but we also made an appeal for unity of nationalistic forces, which our critics define as Hindutva, and also that we would fight corruption. It is our view, and it's my view particularly, that past history shows that pure economic performance does not guarantee electoral success. Mr. Morarji Desai produced in a brief period of 2.5 years one of the best economic situations, particularly for the people, because he controlled prices to such an extent that even ration cards became unfashionable. But he lost the election, and lost it pretty badly. Or rather, the Janata Party, of which he was the head, lost it very badly. Mr. Narasimha Rao produced a miracle of sorts. He abolished the Soviet economic system, brought in market economy, growth rate increased from a small percentage of 3.5% per year to 8% within 5 years. But when the elections came, he lost, and the party strength became half. The same thing happened with Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who prided himself as having created a shining India. But ultimately, the defeat was as bad. The party strength became half. So in the states also, I can give you examples of Chandrababu Naidu, Mr. S.M. Krishna in Karnataka. Reforms have not produced electoral successes. They have to be combined with other things. And that's why we brought in these three together, namely governance and fighting corruption and uniting the Indian electorate on what is called as Hindutva. Now, earlier on, and I'll make this as my last political comment before I get to economics. Earlier on, the strategy of at least the Congress party appeared to be to unite the minorities and divide the majority on caste, region, language, etc. And thereby they had a long string of successes electorally. And what the BJP did was to reverse, unite the majority and divide the minority. Particularly, the women of the minorities, particularly the Muslim community, voted for us because we took certain stands which we thought was in the interest of gender equality, like abolition or promising to abolish, and which it did abolish, the triple talaq, for example. So, at the moment when I'm speaking to you about the economy, I would like to tell you that I'm pretty confident that because of the other two planks, 2019 also will win the elections without any doubt. I don't want to disappoint my good friend sitting here who spoke before me. I don't hold it against him that he's a member of the Congress party, but he's a friend of mine and been for a long time. But this is the perspective in which I'm going to present it, because I'm going to tell you like it is. And I have license from my party to speak what I like. And they better like it too. First of all, during this last 4.5 years, there has been a deceleration in growth rate of GDP. We started with the first 2 years with an increase, And this increase followed after almost a long period, 2007 to 2014, of the previous government of decelerating growth rates. They blamed it on international, global crises, etc., etc. But the fact of the matter is that the growth rates had decelerated. Then the 2014-15 financial year and the 2015-16 financial year, growth rates increased. But then it has been decelerating, and today it's perhaps around 6%, which by past standards of the era of Soviet economic planning, when it was just 3.5%, it's quite large. But it's not enough. We need minimum of 10% per year for a period of 10 years to solve the basic problems of unemployment and inequality. And so I'll come back to that, but I would like to say that it is a fact that the growth rate that we have today is inadequate, and we need a much faster growth rate. The second thing, which is also quite alarming, and that is the gross fixed capital formation and the rate of domestic savings has declined over the last 4 years. It was declining earlier too for the previous 2 years before we came to power, but it's declined now. And there is a reason for it, and that is the high interest rates that was pursued by the Reserve Bank governor. And he almost made it into a kind of an ideological issue that to control inflation, you need high interest rates. High interest rates raise the cost of capital of small and medium industries. And therefore, small and medium industries which work on a very thin balance started collapsing and folding up. And the unemployment increase that we have seen in the last 4.5 years is primarily due to that. The idea that raising interest rates will lower inflation is like a doctor who says that the best way to reduce the temperature of a patient is to kill him. Then the temperature will definitely come down. In a sense, that is what the high interest rates has done, and we're still paying a price for it. There is a very little turnaround on that, but I do think that the rate of interest at the prime lending rate should not exceed 9%. And I also believe that the fixed deposit for 5 years should not be less than 9%. If we can do that, lower these interest rates in the coming years, we will see a major turnaround, not only in gross fixed capital formation, but also in the rate of domestic savings. India is one of the few countries of the world which has such a high household contribution to savings. And the total domestic savings at one stage was 35% of GDP. And with the addition of foreign investment, it became 38%. But the capital was inefficiently used, largely because of the various factors, including corruption. And therefore, what we should have easily got a 10% growth rate, we got 7 to 8% growth rate. So the inefficiency in the use of capital has also become a factor. The third thing that we have noticed is that not only there's rise in the level of unemployment, but also the businesses have started shifting to contractual employment, not a steady, long-term employment in the standard sense of the word, but contractual. And that's because the fact that we have made no change yet in the labor laws which were formulated during the socialistic period of 1950 to 1990. The capital intensity of our industries is also too high. In fact, we should have encouraged the small and medium industries to a great extent to become feeder companies to the large industry. because they are the ones which generate 2/3 of the unemployment in our country. The fourth thing is something that is a legacy. The budget today, you find, is heading towards what is called as a debt trap. 19% of the budget revenue comes from fresh loans, but 18% of the expenditure shown in the budget is on interest payments on past loans. So you can see that it's now just 1% away from a debt trap. This debt trap has become a reality, is becoming a reality, partly because of the fact that the banks have been engaged in what we call as crony lending. And as a consequence, you see the fact that many of the people who have taken loans have not paid them back, and then they have escaped, mostly to the United States. So this is one of the other factors which is making out that the economic performance of our government is still a long way off from the governance that we had promised. The other things which have complicated matters is demonetization, the GST and the tax terror. Demonetization was actually recommended by me when I was made the chairman of the Strategic Action Committee for Lok Sabha election by Mr. Narendra Modi. And that time I had suggested that demonetization should be resorted only when we are sure that we have 6 times more 100 rupee notes than we have at that time, and so that there is no currency crunch of new notes when the demonetization is announced. And that's why these long queues would not have happened if we had enough currency already printed and ready. Second thing is, I suggested that all those who have cash, they should be allowed to deposit it in their own bank account, and the government will take 25% of it as levy, and the person who deposited it will be able to withdraw 25% as new cash in new notes for his own cash needs, and the remaining 50% could remain for 5 years in fixed deposit. That also was not done. And in the end, what happened in demonetization is that if I had 10,000 rupees as black money or cash, after the demonetization, I was left with 7,500 rupees, that is 75% of it, in new notes. And the remaining 25% or 2,500 went to the bank employees or the bank officers. The people who made most of the money in this demonetization were bank officials who were clandestinely converting the old notes into new notes. So I would say that demonetization, although it was a failure, the public, however, didn't seem to mind. I was very surprised that people standing in queues would be cursing the government. But somehow they all felt that by this, the rich people were brought to book, a general sentiment, which is why it didn't have any effect in the elections that took place. GST is not our bright idea. It was actually Salman Khurshid's government's bright idea. But I don't know what happened to Mr. Jaitley. He took it upon as his own. But we were totally unprepared for it. I'll give you an example how unprepared we were. And the Congress party today cannot criticize us because when it came to voting, the only dissident voice was mine. The Congress party voted with us for the first time in the history of Parliament, 100% of the vote. I also, of course, voted because I was subject to party discipline, and therefore I had to do it, but I made a lot of noise before I agreed to do it. The Congress party voted for every provision of the bill. Now, I'll give you an example how absurd it is. The idea of GST was that tax will be collected from one place where the sale takes place. And that the revenue foregone by manufacturing states, where it is not sold, it's sold in another state. So the loss of revenue caused to the manufacturing state will be made up by a constitutional amendment which will collect the taxes. The indirect taxes under the old constitution before the amendment was that the states will levy the indirect taxes. Now the center would levy and collect it, and then it would redistribute it between the manufacturing states and the states where it was sold. That required a huge, gigantic computer program, because there are lakhs and lakhs of commercial firms, industries, and so on. And all these data have to be collected together, put into a program, and then the division has to be done. So a private limited company was created by the government, and that not by our government, but the previous government, in which the majority shares were with the private players in it, that is the ICICI Bank, the HDFC Bank, and 2-3 other companies which are also private companies. Now, ICICI Bank and the HDFC banks are not Indian companies, Indian banks. They are 75% shares are owned by foreigners. It's actually the Reserve Bank has declared them as foreign banks. But anyway, they were there. They had 51% of the shares. The government, that is central government and state governments, had 49%. And as a consequence, the companies' operations were really run by the private sector. But the expenses for producing the computer program and other expenses were met 100% by the government of India. The minority shareholders will produce the money for the expenses. So the Infosys was selected to produce the computer program, and they promised to, after taking the money, they promised to deliver it on 1st of July 2017. On June 30th, midnight, the Infosys informed the government of India that they're not in a position to produce the computer program. And they needed more money. And they got more money, 3,000 crores extra. And still the computer program has not come. All that has happened is these vast amount of money, for instance, ICICI Bank has got from the revenue collected by the central government of indirect taxes, 6 lakh crores is in the accounts of the ICICI Bank, which has been lending that money for 10 days, 20 days at 15% and 20% interest rates and making money on it. Now, I couldn't understand why the government would do this. I did protest. The Prime Minister asked me when this short time available whether I could suggest something. So I said, first get a clearance from the Home Ministry that this is not violative of our provisions of national security, which is applied whenever foreign companies come into government operations. And it was referred to the Home Ministry. The Home Ministry is still to give that clearance of national security, but the operations are on. And the second thing, it should be subject to the CAG, the Comptroller and Auditor General analysis and audit of how the money is being spent. But at the moment, GST is a nightmare. And in my opinion, it should not have been implemented before the 2019 elections. But in any case, at the moment, it's a nightmare. The lack of compliance is very, very high. And it's a failure, and we have to admit that. So, and on top of that, we have increasing taxes, punitive measures, and there is definitely a feeling amongst our business that there is tax terrorism, and this needs to be corrected. So after giving you all the bad news, let me give you some good news. Now, the first good news is that Narendra Modi has been leaving all the macro issues to the finance ministry. But he himself has done a large number of micro projects. And some of them have been very popular. Only when you go to village areas you will find. For instance, a simple idea that instead of cooking with wood, you should get a gas cylinder. That has now reached about 40% of the rural population. But it has worked wonders in terms of the attitudinal change. Because previously women, when they were cooking or making chapatis with wood, they had to cry through the whole process. Now they don't have to do that. And that word has spread, that it has come to the neighbor's house, the gas cylinder will come to your house soon. That has had a major factor why in elections it has not been so bad. I will mention something about the by-election if I have time, but at the moment I'm saying that his Jan Aadhar, this Ujjwala, all these projects, these micro projects, have had a huge impact on the public attitude to our government. And that is something that will stand us in good stead. Second is that India has one quality which you must see from its history. It can recover very fast. When things look really bad, something happens and everything transforms. In 1965, 66, 67, there was a famine, and we used to beg from the United States for PL 480 wheat. We used to be, as the New York Times at that time described it, we were living from ship to mouth. That is, waiting for the next consignment of wheat to arrive by some ship from America. That was those days. It just took what Sri Lal Bahadur Shastri, after succeeding Jawaharlal Nehru, did was to produce a package with the help of the Food Research Institute in Washington and the Philippines Rice Research Institute, a package which was given to just 10% of the farmers. And that package included the right amount of fertilizer, the assurance of water, electricity, and so on. This 10% transformed a country which was at that time begging for food from abroad to a country which became self-sufficient by 1975. So one simple measure could do that. Same thing with the change that took place in 1991 with Narasimha Rao, which was preceded by the Chandra Shekhar government, where the process started with my starting to, I was always anti-socialist, so I wanted to dismantle socialism as fast as I could. And I had two very gifted people with me, Manmohan Singh, who was our economic advisor. He had run away to Geneva in 1988, and then I telephoned him and requested him to come back and be our economic advisor. And he made only one condition, that my secretary, that is the secretary of the ministry, should be Montek Singh Ahluwalia, so which I agreed. So the three of us sat together and produced the blueprints, but we could not implement it because the government, Mr. Chandra Shekhar, fell. And succeeding him was Narasimha Rao, who wanted me to join the Congress party and become a minister in his government. I said that I cannot do because Congress party is a family property and you're a tenant in it. And therefore, don't know when you will be thrown out or I will be thrown out. So therefore, I will stay out. So therefore, he made me a chairman of Commission on International Trade and the WTO issues and gave me cabinet rank. And I could attend cabinet meetings. So in that, I must say, Narasimha Rao put his mind to it and did what no congressman would dare to do, namely abolish quotas, licenses, in one blow. People said there'll be chaos. And that produced the change, the economic reform. No one has had the nerve to repeat his kind of reform since then. It's all been nitpicking after that. One measure here, not one measure there. But that was the change that took place. And you see what you got. We were told 3.5% per year. Economists in this country like Amartya Sen were saying it's a Hindu rate of growth. Hindu rate of growth. How could it be Hindu rate of growth when we were adopting a communist model of the Soviet Union? But anyway, this is how they were derisive, that we can't grow faster than 3.5% per year. But Narasimha Rao showed within 5 years, we were on an 8% growth rate path. And therefore, even today, when we say growth rate is lowering, it's not very much lower. So consequently, I would say, drawing from this, India can recover in no time. The potential of India is tremendous. Let us recognize that, and on that point, I will conclude what I have to say. India, all it has to do is, A, make the productivity of the use of capital much better than it is today. If I may use a term called capital output ratio, we are running at 4. It can easily be 3.5 or even 3. Japan has for years during its growth had 2.8 as its capital output ratio. And capital output ratio, the rate of investment divided by the capital output ratio is the growth rate in economy. So if your rate of investment is 36% and your capital output ratio is 3.6, that means the growth rate is 10% per year. So one is this efficiency, and that can only come by removing corruption, by simplifying our control systems, by enabling people by incentives to do the right thing. I am in favor of doing certain drastic things like Mr. Narasimha Rao did. For instance, today, if you really want to enthuse the Indian people, I think the first measure, one of the dangers of economic reform is that it affects the beneficiaries of the control system first, and the rewards for the ordinary people comes last. And that was the problem with Narasimha Rao, that he abolished controls and licenses. So all the black market income that people are getting, who are naturally, for their influence, were affiliated with the Congress party, they were first to lose. The benefit of his actions did not reach the people for 3-4 years. And during this 3-4 years, massive propaganda was let loose against Mr. Narasimha Rao, that he was pro-capitalist, this is all for capitalism. So we have to devise those reforms where the benefits come immediately. And the one benefit I would suggest very strongly, and I've been suggesting very strongly to the government, is to abolish income tax altogether. Because income tax gives you personal income tax gives you only 4 lakh crores rupees per year. One auction of a 2G license, which came about because of my petition in the Supreme Court, that giving by discretion is not allowed. You have to auction the license. The auctioning has taken place. We have been getting 4 lakh crores a year on a full auction of the 2G spectrum. Now we got 3G coming. We got 4G. Soon we'll have 5G. So there's a period by which you can get all this. Same thing with the coal auctioning. A large amount of money can come. There's no shortage of resources in India if you find the right way. But an income tax abolition would remove this present corrupt system where people are harassed by income tax officials, and therefore take the easy way out by bribing either the income tax officer or underreporting their income. So these are the kinds of things we have to do. A lot of innovations are possible. We are, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka is all the time fighting for water. I asked the Tamilian people, you want Kaveri water or you want water? Because if you want water, you can desalinate water, seawater. And many countries of the world are doing that. That kind of technology. We have 60% of the world's thorium. Uranium will probably be exhausted by 2050. And thorium will be the future nuclear fuel. And we have got 60% of it. We have not bothered to do enough research on that. We have a huge population of young people. 75% of our people are less than 35 years. Of the large countries, this is the largest proportion of people you can have at that age. This grouping, if properly educated, and education becomes an extremely important part, would be the entrepreneurs, those who will bring about those new innovations that the country needs. And this way, India can change overnight. We have done so in the past, we can do it in the future. I've told you the truth about our economic performance, but I'm also very confident that the next term, it's bad news, but don't mind it. We are going to come back to power, and we will certainly, with these new reforms, and I probably would be in a better position than before to get it through. These reforms, India will turn around and grow for at least 10 years at 10% growth rate to become a major global economic power. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Swamy, for those valuable perspectives. We would now like to invite the moderator for this panel, Mr. William Foster, the Vice President at Moody's Sovereign Risk Group and lead analyst covering India, among other nations. He's also served as an advisor of the International Affairs at IMF and is an active member of the Industry Advisory Board for Columbia Business School's India Initiative. Can we please have Mr. William Foster?
To go.
Microphone.
Can we also have Mr. Khurshid back on stage for the panel?
I thought about that.
You've changed the left and right. So you've come on the left. You've come on the left.
That side?
I'm on the right.
Okay. Yeah.
Technical difficulties fixed. Well, first of all, I want to thank Columbia very much for inviting me, and I'm very fortunate to be sharing the stage with two extremely important leaders in Indian economic policymaking and international affairs. So we think we should please all give them another round of applause for their participation today. And let's just go straight into the questions, following your remarks. We're going to have a series of questions that I'd like to ask them, and then at the end we're going to give you about 15 minutes or so for Q&A for the students. So that's let's go ahead and start. We covered quite a bit on the reform agenda, and I think this is certainly something that many India watchers are scrutinizing very closely since 2014 in particular. There was a lot of anticipation and expectations around what this government would be able to do in terms of transforming the economy and really launching growth to a higher level, as you said, that should at some, ideally be close to 10%.
Yes.
So of the various policy reforms and administrative measures that we've seen over the last few years, for example, you mentioned GST, demonetization, there's also the insolvency code, bankruptcy act code, as well as the digitization efforts, Aadhaar, applying that to financial inclusion, and then as well as the direct benefit transfer programs. So of these various measures, what would each of you say are the most important, if you had to choose one or two that you think are going to be the most important or most consequential for the long-term sustainable growth in India, what would those be?
Or most disastrous of them? Which will be the most disastrous?
That's one way of answering it, sure.
It is.
Well, I'm very encouraged by the honest appraisal that Dr. Swamy has done this afternoon. It's very clear that he's in a minority of one on how things should move forward. But to be fair, as I said, there are some very difficult questions in the area of economic restructuring. A lot of that has to do with the ability of political leaders to persuade common people in our country that this is for their good. And as Dr. Swamy said, the gap of 2 years or 3 years is a long enough gap to frustrate anything that you want to do. So there are no easy answers, frankly. I would imagine that we can only hope to do things in fits and starts, create islands of performance and delivery, and hope that they will not get overwhelmed by the turbulent waters of impatience that is our biggest enemy.
Shall I respond to that? Well, first of all, you should honestly admit that the two big disasters, one is GST and the other is this unique ID, or which you call as Aadhaar, are your gifts to us. And it was foolish for us to have taken it. During the entire discussion, the entire parliamentary debate, your party supported our party on it. And today, you can't say that we have made a wrong decision. This decision was yours, we just carried it forward. And we should not have, that's another matter, but the fact is that in this, both of us are complicit, and we should both agree to share the burden of what has happened in the country.
I have no problem with that. And if I had to express regret for anything, is to express the regret that many of our decisions have caused a situation that we cannot reverse. Two of these decisions are our plans to introduce Aadhaar and our plans to introduce GST, have certainly caused distress. The third big mistake I think we made is to allow Mr. Modi to become Prime Minister.
I'm caught between the two of you. This is quite interesting. Mr. Khurshid, I'll ask you a different question. So as you look forward to the challenges to growth, so we have the scenario today which we're discussing, but if you look forward, if you project forward in terms of the key bottlenecks to growth after, let's say, the disruption from GST, demonetization, etc. settles, what do you consider the key bottlenecks to long-term sustainable growth in India?
Well, I think the key bottlenecks essentially are natural resources. We are in a situation of great stress on water, for instance. Dr. Swamy is right that there is no magic wand by which we can find enough water in the rivers for everybody, for drinking purposes, for industry, for agriculture. So that's the huge, big problem. Our problem used to be fossil fuel, but we have a solution on that for the present. But we don't have a solution on water. That's a huge, huge problem. I think our second big problem is pollution generally. And the impact of climate change. We haven't even started thinking about these issues seriously. And last of all, of course, is equity. And I think fundamental questions of reverse discrimination, of redistribution of wealth, that we had over the 50 years found solutions to the extent that those solutions worked, I think is now begin to wear off. And everyone needs to sit down together and talk about issues of equity and equality. Because if the issues of equity and equality are not resolved in our country, everything that we do will just be wasted.
Dr. Swamy, you'd mentioned abolishing indirect tax as
no, not the direct tax.
Direct
personal
tax.
Tax.
Direct tax as a potential solution to really catalyzing investment and growth. Yeah. Are there any other measures that perhaps more politically feasible?
No, this is politically feasible. It's only the income tax inspectors and those sadistic politicians who would like people to come and petition them to get them off income tax prosecution. They are the ones in the way, but it's a generally popular move which the people would welcome it. And the other things I would like to see done is I'd like to see the interest rate brought down. The prime lending rate brought down to 9%, because at the present level, what we are seeing, witnessing is interest arbitrage taking place. People from, say, United States will take loans at 2% interest, come to India and lend it out at 12% or more. So we must bring down the interest rates so that the small and medium industries, which play a major role in creating employment for the semi-skilled, they are become viable and they are able to operate the business. And also raise the fixed deposit or term deposits, it's called here, rate to 9%. Both, if those are done, then I think the rate of savings will go up and the rate of capital formation will also go up because the capital has become cheaper. And people who have now been liberated from the income tax, they will save the money. Indians are good savers. The household ratings, household savings as a proportion of GDP in India is one of the highest. It's 29% of GDP. In China, it's 15%. United States is minus because everything is on credit here. So therefore, the Indian people have to be given incentive. You can't terrorize them, you can't force them, you can't go on raising income tax and expecting compliance. These are two very easy things to do, and I think that should be done right away.
Land and labor reforms are often referenced as key reforms that are moving forward to really maybe catalyze growth in India. And in fact, our Columbia faculty, Professor Arvind Panagaria, former vice chair of
he was on a special committee,
he's written at length about that. What are your views on land and labor reforms?
Well, I think he's spent too much time on definitional question, whether temporary employment should be treated as permanent employment and all that. I would say only one thing needs to be done for labor reform. You can sack anybody, but you have to pay him by check 2 years of his salary on a monthly basis. It should go by post, and he has to find another job during those 2 years, and after that, that payment will be stopped. The advantage would be that then labor unions will not have. There won't be a disgrace to be part of a labor union. Labor unions are primarily now sort of a coercive body, and many of them had at one stage even degenerated into mafia status. To weaken that and encourage people. You see, if you look at the capital intensity of our business has gone up, and as I saw, there's a big conversion to contractual labor. From giving people permanent status and then give them training and then make them spend 30 years in the factory or in the firm. So to remove that, there's only one, and I've spoken to many business people. They say this fear that once we employ somebody on a regular basis, then we are stuck with them, whether he's good or bad. So we must have the power to hire and fire. Hire and fire in a country like India is not possible. So I suggested via media that you allow the companies to fire him, but tell him that for 2 years we will send you regularly your check payments of your salary, and you have to find another job. That alone is enough, in my opinion. I actually, by the way, headed a commission during Narasimha Rao's time called on labor standards. We produced a 3-volume thing on how labor reforms can be brought about. But the Narasimha Rao government adopted it in their cabinet meeting, but we have not implemented it at all. There is enough material available to implement a comprehensive labor reform, and that I would consider as priority.
Mr. Khurshid, your views on land and labor reform in India?
Well, I think labor reform is a politically a hot potato. And it's politically a hot potato because we haven't, in our country, the leadership of political parties, the top leadership of political parties, hasn't spent enough time educating people about democracy and about economics in democracy. And therefore, this conundrum of good economics is bad politics, and bad politics is bad economics is hurting us. As I said, we need a discourse and we need a dialogue. I hope Dr. Swamy will agree that if there's paucity of something in India today, it's of dialogue. Whatever be the reason, I'm not blaming anyone. I think everyone needs to make an effort to reach out and discuss and dialogue and find solutions. We don't find solutions, we just postpone to another day or postpone to another election. And I think that's the biggest problem for us that's dragging us down.
Job creation is another significant challenge in India, extremely important both for the economics and for the political outlook. It was obviously one of the aspects of the platform that this government ran on. It said that India would need to create up to 1 million jobs per month in order to keep up with demographic trends. How should or will business leaders and the government be able to work together to address this challenge?
Well, I think first of all, any firm employing anybody should be given corporate tax advantages if they build schools for their employees and provide transportation to bring them to factories or to their places of work. This incentivization of looking after labor would go a long way. Second, in my opinion, the fact of the matter is that the only reason our companies favor raising the capital-labor ratio, that is using more capital than it's actually necessary to produce the product, is because of the fact that larger labor force means unionization, and unionization means intimidation. That's how it has happened. And the labor laws, the labor courts, they take ages, they give you a stay order, and then they don't decide the case for a long time. So the person, in effect, is in the employment of the factory continues to be there and become difficult. So therefore, I've suggested this suggestion. You can fire, get him off your campus, but you give him 2 years of his salary so that on a monthly basis, you send him a check so that he can find another job. This would, in my opinion, transform the situation.
Khurshid?
Well, I think that there have to be some innovative ideas. If we just look around in my state of Uttar Pradesh, repeatedly in the Supreme Court, there have been affidavits filed that they need, for law and order, for policing of the state, they need 100,000 people. 100,000 people is the real estimate of the number of people required on the job. They are unable to recruit 100,000 people for a variety of reasons. Ultimately, essentially, is just bad politics. Similarly, in the state of Bihar, for instance, there are 400,000 assistant teachers or teachers' assistants, as they are called, who are being paid a pittance, when it's very clear that for the educational system that 400,000 teachers are required. Now, where jobs are available, where people are required for jobs, we are not employing people. We are not giving them the wages that we should be giving to them. It's obviously just extremely short-sighted, myopic politics. Of course you need money for this, but you need money for anything. I mean, I've heard people argue that we can't employ these people because it will cost so much money. Now, how can any government in any part of the world ever say we can't employ teachers because it costs so much money? If it does cost money, you have to find a solution. India, till 20 years ago, couldn't think of building roads everywhere to connect every village in the country. Today we are. Today we are building metros in every city. We are building highways across the country. We are linking every road with every village with all-weather roads. Where is the money coming from? The money has to be found. So I think it's a matter of political attitude. We need innovational methods by which jobs are to be given, and at the end of the day, we have to decide what to do with labor-intensive or capital-intensive industry. If you want to be like the rest of the world, obviously you want capital-intensive industry, but if you want to be truthful to India, then you have to have labor-intensive, and labor-intensive industry is available. It's just a choice. It's a choice that you have to make.
Right.
Another issue right now that needs to be addressed for the investment cycle to pick up in India, obviously, is the banking system and addressing the very high non-performing loans that are on bank balance sheets that really is a legacy issue of sorts. There was a resolution mechanism that had been put in place over the last few years. In addition to that, the public sector banks were recapitalized. That seemed to be kind of steps in the right direction. And then all of a sudden, more recently, you have the Punjab National Bank fraud case that was uncovered. Where do you see the banking system headed right now, and to what extent will these problems be able to be addressed sustainably, and what impact is it having on growth?
Well, there's a proportion of what is called as the non-performing assets, that is those loans which have not been paid back due to high interest rates and a weakening market for products. So I would separate them out from these gigantic numbers that we are seeing, where it's the collusion of the politician with the businessman which is causing that. And it is fundamentally a corruption issue. And in my opinion, I have done a mathematical analysis of this to see what would really cause corruption to go or get minimized. And that is if you can create an expectation that if such people can be caught, then I too can be caught. Rather than catching the bank clerk or the policeman and prosecuting him, I think we should concentrate on catching the people at the highest level. And that will filter down to removing corruption. Most of the corruption in the banks are clearly due to the political patronage and the appointment system of bank managers, bank chairmen, etc., which is happening. And it's not only public sector. The private sector, for instance, ICICI Bank is a private sector. It's not even a private sector, it's foreign owned. And we haven't yet seen all the truths about ICICI yet. It's spilling out in doses. But I would say, whether private or public, the fact is that when political interests protect the corrupt, then this sort of thing will happen. And that is where we have to attack it, not to restructure the banks or create new norms or bring Basel III, etc.
I'd like to shift to politics, which would be interesting to hear your respective views on, obviously. We have some very important state elections coming up in India, particularly toward the end of the year. Karnataka, I think, is in May. And then we have three important BJP-led states at the end of the year, including Rajasthan. We've seen some signs of anti-incumbency. You mentioned the by-elections, etc. Could you share your views on what you think is happening right now with the electorate in India, and what implications this may have for the state elections, and in addition to that, what that means for the reform agenda for the government?
Sure. Would you like to go first?
I'll go first because he's already announced the 2019 results, so I might as well go first. Well, I think we need to acknowledge that they've had a dream run from 2014 for good reason. They've organized themselves very well. They had enough money available, and they've done a good job. And we obviously were not prepared well enough to contest these elections. But things are changing. Things are changing. It's very clear that the popularity wave on which they came to power in 2014 is nowhere near where it was in 2014. I think that's more than clear. But it hasn't waned completely. The critical states that could change things are Karnataka, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh. where we believe that we have a very good fight and that we should do rather well. Karnataka will probably decide whether there's an early 2019 election, i.e. is the election in 2018 or 2019, will be decided by Karnataka. If Karnataka goes our way, as we hope it will, Rajasthan will go our way, as we hope we will, and Madhya Pradesh too. I think that will make a massive difference, However, we can't just take things for granted. It is important for 2019 for a united front to be up against the BJP. What happened in Phulpur and Gorakhpur that Dr. Swamy was said that he might say something about is a clear indication that the arithmetic is against them, if the arithmetic can be done right. But it can't just be arithmetic, it has to be more than arithmetic. And that's what is the challenge for all of us together. Things are beginning to come together. I hope that it'll all fall in place before they announce the elections for 2019.
Well, I'm in substantial agreement, except to say that this by-election, which is now being quoted and on which so much euphoria has been generated, the victory of the two caste-based parties coming together was overshadowed a fact which requires to be recognized, and that is the miserable performance of the Congress party in these elections. Both in Phulpur and in Gorakhpur, the Congress party lost its deposits, as they say. That's getting less than 1/6 of the vote, which means the money you deposit becomes the property of the state because you didn't get enough votes. So, where has the Congress party shown a revival or a return that is to be yet demonstrated? And the obvious place...
Ajmer.
No, that's again in a by-election.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a by-election where you have, definitely, I'll come to Rajasthan, but I'm saying where you can show that you are making a major comeback for the central power would be the Karnataka elections. And there, I think the situation is not clear. I will not say that we are bound to win it. There is a tough fight, and we have many things to overcome. But we feel that ours is much more it's a kind of a trident that we have. We have appeals on 3 points: on corruption, whatever may be the Congress party allegations, they are just allegations. There is no conversion it into a court case and a private complaint and getting action taken like we did when they were in power, and we are continuing to do so. So there is no belief that this government is corrupt. In fact, there is a general acceptance that our government is less corrupt than Congress or any of the other opposition parties. So that's one big plus we have. Second is this unity of Hindus, which is based essentially on a growing feeling over the years, whether it's justified or not, it's there, that the Hindus, despite being 80%, are being put down upon. And that the minorities have got, which may not be true, but I mean, factually it may not be true, but that the minorities have got a first preference, partly because of statements which have been made by Congress leaders, like that the Muslim community has the first charge on the resources of India, which is attributed to Mr. Manmohan Singh. And the way the Hindu terror concept was revived, which was totally bogus and based on lack of facts. So there is that feeling is definitely there, and that Hindu consolidation takes place, and it could take place in Karnataka too, because of the support for Congress in adulating whom the Hindu community thinks is a butcher, namely Tipu Sultan, or dividing the one caste group which has annoyed practically every spiritual leader, we call them sadhus and sannyasis. Every one of them is so upset with this division of the so-called Lingayat community that has taken place recently, breaking a group of Hindus and calling them a minority and giving them reservations, which in my opinion is unconstitutional also. These are some of the things in which we have more marbles to play with. We have got anti-corruption, and we are doing quite a bit of it now. It's going to be stepping up. Many of your friends you may have to visit in TR jail very soon. That the Prime Minister himself has told me, and he's taking it very seriously. I've seen many of the roadblocks I faced in the first 4 years in fighting corruption has now just melted away. Now there's much more smooth conversion of data into charge sheets and prosecution. So on corruption, we have got a better image than anybody in the opposition. On the fact that we are a party which represents the interests of the Hindus, put it crudely, I mean I put it more sophisticatedly, that we are for the nationalist Indians. But put it bluntly, it's the Hindu community is 80%. And we are treated as a party which represents at least to see that their interests are not hurt. And of course, nothing will go outside the Constitution, but within the Constitution. The part where we are weak is the economic performance. And that we'll find a scapegoat by the time the elections come. And we'll say we'll do better next time.
You're very honest. Certainly appreciate it.
5 minutes left.
Final question for me, and then we'll shift to audience Q&A. But if you were a young entrepreneur today in India, yes, what business would you launch and why?
I think...
politics.
That's the fastest way to make money. Yeah, I agree.
Start with
you start.
Khurshid.
Well, obviously the big thing is, as here, is software. Startups in software is the big thing. But I think hospitality sector is the critical sector that's both contributing to growth in our country in a major way, and which would give you a link with the exciting new aspirations that we have amongst young people, and which also I think links us with the positive dimension of Indianhood. I think the hospitality sector is the critical area. So software and hospitality, anything there, a startup is the ideal thing. But the most successful things, of course, in India are restaurants and schools. So, but that's not, I mean, restaurants is business, schools is not business, but a lot of the top industrial houses now are going into schools and universities. So it's perhaps a good thing in a way that the money is coming into universities and into education at school level. But of course, there's a problem on school level education because we are not legally, we're not entitled to treat it as mimicking business in any way. But so what happens there, a lot of stuff is done underhand, but there are some really, really outstanding schools coming up, and a lot of the young people are going into education.
Dr. Swamy?
I would advise young people who, and I've been doing so who ask me, I say the big thing that is coming is infrastructure development, because that's very lousy at the moment, and we have presently a dynamic minister in charge of the infrastructure, Nitin Gadkari, and I think they should take a small piece of the infrastructure and, like a small and medium industry, supply some part of the infrastructure thing. That, I think, is the safest and probably the highest return that we can get. This is one area. The other area I find is very profitable is to take special projects which industries want to, what they call as hand it over. There are drug companies which want research done. Research laboratories have a great future. I would think that software, if somebody could venture into design, to the design area, not just be a blue-collar software company, but to think in terms of designing a product which could rival something like the Microsoft the state also will be able to provide a lot of support on that. And the third thing is in terms of the defense industry is also going to be a big thing in our country. And so to become a subsidiary of a defense project of the government, that will be the third thing.
Thank you. We're going to open up questions to the audience now. We have microphones here and here. If you can please state your name, where you're from, and make it very brief, one question only, and we'll start here.
Good afternoon. My name is Rajendra, and I'm from New Jersey. I work in New York. Question to Mr. Swamy. You have rightly said, the growth rate in the present BJP government is lower than the Congress government. Employment is down. The NPAs are very high. And by the way, Mr. Swamy, corruption is still rampant. You have the Nirav Modis, the Lalit Modis, and Vijay Mallya's all have run out of the country in this present government. Whereas in the past government, we had put our own coalition partners, Kanimauzi, Jagan Reddy, and all in jail. There is a difference between Congress and BJP. And the second question, sir, second point is, Congress got some really good reforms that have touched the common man, employment generation, which your own government supports in Parliament, but outside you to criticize it. Food security bill that provides food for the most common man. These have touched the most common man in India and lifted the poverty levels. 300 million people were risen above the poverty level in the UPA 1 and 2 government.
Okay.
You look, one moment.
We have many people and not a lot of time. So if
I have not seen a single program that is inclusive in the present BJP government that is helping the common man rise above the poverty levels. Corruption is still high. Divisive politics is very, very rampant.
Can you? This is not a question.
Where are we going?
Statement.
No, this is a question. Do you have a big vision for India? Do you have a big vision for India that you are claiming will win you the 2019 elections? This question is for you.
Okay.
Well, first of all, let me tell you that this 80-20 goal policy was not our government's doing, which has led to the maximum, the largest scam that's possible. PNB also played a role in issuing LOUs. That was done by Mr. Chidambaram on the last day of his tenure as finance minister, and counter-signed and implemented by Mr. Raghuram Rajan, who was an appointee of the previous government. With great difficulty, I got him to go back to his home country, that means the United States. So there is, if you think of any of the scandals that you're talking about, I can immediately trace it to its origin in the previous government. That doesn't help any. The point I said is, you don't have an A Raja in our government that you have been able to identify. Not a single minister has been accused of any corruption in our government. Accused in a concrete sense. I mean, on the air you can say anything. But there is no allegation of corruption against the BJP government, which is not so when the previous Congress government was there. So when you are making this comparison, please keep in mind that many of the things we are discovering today were subterranean, and we have now it's all coming out in the open. We have to see what is it that we have done, what the BJP government has done that you can call as corruption. You can't name you a single one of those possibilities. The second thing is that what we are going to do in 2019, I've already told you, we will campaign on three things. First is that we will eliminate whatever corruption we could not do in these 5 years for a variety of reasons. And we have got good reasons too. And the second is that we want to build a strong India, united India. We are not against the minorities. In fact, if the minorities violate gender laws, then we will fight for them, unlike the previous governments did. We have demonstrated it already. Now we are on to polyandry and other things. So the minority support from women is something you have to go and see for yourself. So I think when you talk about inclusive, I don't know what inclusive means. It means what? That we cannot go outside the Constitution. No government can go out of the Constitution, and the Constitution of India is one of the most inclusive documents that have been produced. So within that framework of the Constitution, they show me one thing that we have violated, and you will not be able to show that. So consequently, I think we have, when we go, finally, when the thing goes, and there's a motley crowd of 26 parties against us, we will say, you want a government which works or a government which is going to be distributing rewards for each other. That will be our selling point.
We are completely out of time, unfortunately. I'm being told very strongly from the side of the stage. So thank you very much. Please join me in a round of applause for Dr. Swamy and Mr. Khurshid. Thank you very much.
And applause for the chairman too. He's conducted very well.